Hello, everyone. Wow, there's a
Hi.
lot of people there. Hi, Courtney. How are you?
Woo.
Great. I welcome everybody to this webinar sponsored by Studio. Um, there are tons of people here present. So happy to see all of you here today. Thanks for taking some time to listen to the webinar, which actually is we're really grateful for in these times of uncertainty and challenges. And but we want this webinar to be super positive and constructive. And as schools are struggling these days in getting organized and trying to find new ways to help students keep learning, as some schools have to close temporarily. um, a lot of responsibility falls back down on students' shoulders. And one of the basic important sets of skills that will help students through these times are executive functioning skills. Now, it's a coincidence because, as you'll see, these skills have been important for a long time and they're still important throughout life. So let's talk about the community this is part of. On EdWeb, the brain and learning community is a great community to discuss anything that has to do with the brain and learning, obviously. We will view, and you'll be able to share the recording there. So you'll be able to access it after, or you'll be able to download the slides and the chat log in case you see something go by that you don't want to miss. There are other discussions to be had there on these topics. And of course, if you're part of the community, you can get it and an invitation to other webinars such as this one. Now you can join this community at edweb.net/brain. Pretty simple URL to remember. Now, I've been talking for a little while, and you see Courtney here in her gorgeous smile there. Who are we? Well, my name's Renaud. Renaud is a French name up here in Canada, and I am the CEO of a small company called Studio. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Um, I've been in the ed tech industry for a very long time, over 25 years, going on 30 now. And I've worked for Apple Canada for a number of years, so 19 of that. In ed tech, I've worked for districts and private and public schools, implementing technology programs. And over the last few years, I became really concerned with student organization as schools were going one device per student. And that really brought me into the world of executive functioning skills. And our company became really focused on that. And that's when I met Courtney and Hayden Associates. So Courtney is our main presenter today, and I'll let her present herself and start with the presentation. And then we'll both be there to entertain you and interact with you all
Great.
throughout. All
Thanks so much,
yours.
Reno. And thanks everyone for being here today. We're really excited to talk about executive functioning with you. So as you said, my name is Courtney Whitner. I'm a director at Hayton and Associates. We're an educational services company based in sunny Santa Monica, California. We work especially with students on executive function skill building. So this is right in our wheelhouse. Prior to working at Hayton, I served as the director of an executive functioning practice in Fairfield County, Connecticut. So I've been really embedded in this work since 2012 as an executive functioning coach, supervisor, and also working directly with educators on training. So thanks again for being here.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to sliding a little bit of a word on who we are at Studio. We will talk about Studio at the end of the presentation. Most of it is focused on, Courtney and executive functioning skills. But Studio is actually a platform that works on any kind of device that was built especially for one-to-one programs, initially to replace paper planners in these schools that were kind of wanting to replace paper. And it really became a student autonomy tool, a full task and project management tool that students can use to really take their own decisions and take their study skills into their hands and build agency. And over time, it became a full-fledged platform where all of these actions from students provide insights to leaders such as yourselves in understanding how students are getting organized and where they might need some extra help. Um, that really comes from a very quick story because some students they have great grades, and we don't necessarily think they're disorganized, but very often they might be. So I was, I guess, a fairly bright student. I don't want to brag, but when I was in high school, I could do my homework when the teacher was explaining something for the second or third time because other students hadn't understood. And by the time evening came, my stuff was done. And what happened is that I didn't have to work so much, and I didn't have to plan much work. And when I reached college, that first year of college, well, that really hurt me really badly. I had no way of getting organized, and I almost dropped out of college. Thank goodness for my girlfriend at the time. So, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But what's important is that this environment can help prevent some of those things. But in these times of remote schooling, it also provides an additional kind of advantage is that you can monitor how students are using their time and how they're planning their work every day. So we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation, how this can support that. But let's start with going through executive functioning skills and understand what that is. So I'll give it back to you, Courtney, so you can continue.
Awesome. Thanks, Renaud. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start out with a poll to learn a little bit more about you and our audience today. So go ahead and let us know, are you an administrator, a technology director, a teacher, or an allied professional? We're really
Yeah,
excited to see what the stats look like.
this this is exciting. Of course, EdWeb is a
Oh,
great
wow, a
teacher
lot of
community, so
teachers.
lots of
Yay.
teachers for sure.
Okay.
Um, okay, also
I've got
some
some social workers, some parents.
probably some specialists that support students, I guess, in different I'm looking, yeah, instructional designers. I've seen some of those in the chat. That's really great.
Mhm.
Wellness director, yeah, wellness is so important nowadays with social emotional skills needing to be built. School psychologists, school counselors, great, thanks for writing all
Wow.
that in the chat.
This is
And
so
also
cool to see
counselors.
everyone filtering in through the chat. And
It
it looks
is.
like teachers are our winner today with 60% teachers and
Yeah.
15% administrators.
Oh, well, that's, of course, teachers are in the classroom. They're
Mhm.
directly involved, so they want to make sure that they understand all of these things. And executive functioning skills is definitely a very important skill set in the classroom. So we'll
Definitely.
keep this running a few more seconds just so we get an idea. This is probably a reflection of what we have there. We have
Mhm.
380 people right now connected. So about a third or so have answered. So that's
Mhm. And
that's
it's
great. It gives us an idea. So I do. This is really a presentation that's focused on EF skills in general. It does talk about classroom tips and
mhm,
tricks, right, Courtney? But also
absolutely.
we have an administrator aspect of this, so that's really important as well. So great.
Okay,
So
this
should
looks great.
we maybe we'll close the poll now and
That sounds
move
like a
on.
good idea. All right, thank you so much for participating.
Thanks.
All right, so let's take a look at our agenda for the day. So, we're going to start out by doing an overview of executive functioning. I'll tell you a little bit about where the executive functions develop in the brain and just, big picture overview. Then we'll dive into challenges in the digital era, which is more relevant than ever. And then we'll go over some tips and strategies for teaching executive function in the classroom. So, for all of you teachers, that's going to be great information. And then finally, we will cap it off with fostering a culture that promotes executive function. So, tips for a school-wide intervention. And then Raynaud will provide a demo of Studio, the digital planner he was speaking about earlier.
Great.
All right. So, just to make sure everyone is on the same page, we are going to start with an overview of executive functioning. So, executive function is an umbrella term referring to the ability to initiate, break down, and follow through on multi step tasks. It's what allows us to engage in goal oriented behavior. Executive function skills are our higher order brain functions. They help us regulate our behavior and our emotions, and they help us monitor our thoughts in order to complete tasks efficiently. Executive function is like a muscle that can be built or a foreign language that can be acquired. Executive functions are also likened to the conductor of an orchestra or to a CEO because these skills help us manage so many different tasks and solve problems. All right. Harvard's Center on the Developing Child uses this really helpful analogy, which is to think of our brains as air traffic controllers. Much like an air traffic control system at an airport helps planes on runways land and take off safely, executive function skills help our brain prioritize tasks, filter distractions, and control impulses. I love this analogy for students as it makes executive functioning, which is a pretty abstract concept, more easily digestible for them. So you should definitely share it with your kids. All right. So there are three core executive functions: inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. Inhibitory control, or self control, enables us to set priorities and resist impulsive actions or responses. Examples include thinking before you act, resisting your first impulse to say something you don't want to say, which is especially important in this age of social media where just one action can really ruin things for a student. Another example is having the discipline to resist temptations as you work toward a goal. And finally, inhibitory control is responsible for our attention, our ability to concentrate, pay attention, and stay focused. Second, we have working memory. This is our ability to hold information in our mind and use it. Working memory allows us to relate ideas or facts to one another and to make connections. It supports new learning and reasoning. Working memory allows us to reorder the sequence of events and hold it in our mind as we learn new information and then update those events. Oh, um, okay, sorry, I just had a question pop up. Yes, the materials will be shared with you guys. Finally, we have cognitive flexibility, which allows us to switch gears as demands or settings change. For example, thinking outside the box so we can creatively solve problems, and taking on the perspective of another, or a tough one, admitting that we're wrong when we get new information. All right, so let's take a look at the brain and how that's involved with executive functions. All right, so the executive functions live within the frontal lobe. They develop in the prefrontal cortex over the course of adolescence and adulthood. The executive functions are typically fully mature by the mid 20s or age 30. Humans have a really large frontal lobe, and it's the last part of the brain to develop. And that's because the brain is built from the ground up. The gradual development of executive functions directly relates to our brain development. We are all born with the capacity to learn executive function skills or not, depending on our relationships and experiences, and developed through practice. Dopamine, which helps regulate attention and supports learning, is released in the prefrontal cortex as a child becomes interested in a task or is asked to focus. Children with ADHD break down dopamine before it can be used. This is why ADHD is described as a problem with executive functioning, the management system of the brain. Clinical psychologist Thomas Brown notes that children with ADHD can focus on tasks that intensely interest them, but they struggle with other daily tasks. Executive functions begin developing at age 1 in infancy through creative play and interaction with adults. By age 3, most kids can follow two-step processes. And then executive functions increase in complexity from there. There is a dramatic increase between ages 3 and 5, as the executive functions are the biological foundation for school readiness. A study by Clancy Blair and Rachel Peters Raza in 2007 found that executive functions are more important for school readiness than are IQ or entry level reading or math. Knowing this, let's learn more about executive function enablers.
That's really fun, Courtney. I just want to jump in here. We like to
Absolutely.
refer to EF as the new IQ. So I thought it was a
Oh,
nice
I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm going to steal that.
Please do.
All right. So we know that executive functions are important. How can we help children develop them? So the Harvard Center on the Developing Child provides some guidelines. There are three main factors that impact the likelihood of students developing executive functioning skills at school. And these are relationships, experiences, and environment.
Hmm.
Positive relationships with adults need to be supportive, model executive functioning, and then safe, consistent, and reliable. Adults are really going to guide students through executive functioning while they develop these skills. Experiences that promote executive functioning are ones that foster social connections and open ended creative play, especially during the elementary years. Experiences should also incorporate physical exercise and increase in complexity gradually to allow for student success. Spaces that promote executive functioning are and feel safe, so the environment must leave room for creativity, exploration, and exercise.
Yeah. So allowing students to try things so that they build the skills, does that relate to environment?
Absolutely. Yeah, giving them the space to be creative, kind of go out on their own, but know that they have a safe place to return.
Great.
All right. So, what does executive functioning look like day to day for students? If it's nurtured in young children, executive function will allow students to act in a goal directed manner. It manifests itself as the ability to stop performing an action if they're asked to. It's remembering to do something at a certain time and place. For example, remembering to like hang your backpack near the coat closet when you get home from school. It's knowing which assignments or exams to prioritize, like valuing a long term project over a homework assignment that's ungraded. It's the ability to choose the best strategy for solving a task and taking on the perspective of others to exercise cognitive flexibility. And finally, staying focused despite so many distractions in this digital era, and to notice and correct mistakes by self monitoring. All right. So here are some executive function deficits specifically in the context of academics. So here you'll see that a student might forget to bring home or back to school needed materials like books or notebooks. Perhaps they even forget the assignment. These students might have late and missing assignments. They might be physically disorganized in terms of their backpack or school materials. They may have an inaccurate perception of how ready they are for an exam. And as we look at these, just keep in mind that no child wants to perform poorly. It's not an innate instinct that humans have. Kids with low executive function are still misidentified as lazy and apathetic in schools. And while there are sometimes motivation issues perpetuated by this cycle of failure, there typically is truly a deficit within executive functioning, and these kids want to do well and they want support. And teachers can support them, and adults in general can support them by modeling and providing explicit instruction on these strategies and skills. All right, so let's get you guys involved in another poll. So tell me a little bit about your school environments. Do you guys have a one-on-one laptop or iPad program? Do kids bring their own devices? Um, do you have limited technology available at your school? What is the tech like in your setting?
Yeah. We'll include Chromebooks in the laptop category if you like. So
That
if
would
you
be
have a
great.
one-to-one
Mhm.
Chromebook, yeah, we didn't add that in. Courtney, as we're looking at the results here, I have a question from Marion. She's trying to figure out what are tests to be able to detect if students have different executive functioning issues.
Sure, Marian, that is a great question. So neuropsychologists can do, norm-based assessments in executive function, like the brief or the trail making assessment. For teachers, there are several different inventories that you can use. their study skills inventories. And I have a couple that I'd love to share with you if you want to provide your email. But Landmark College has a lot of great resources and their study skills assessments that you can find online as well.
Great. That's fun. Pretty good resources there.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
definitely. Wow, I'm really surprised how many have limited access to technology at this point. I was
Yeah.
hoping to see more one-to-one programs.
Yeah. I have a feeling with the current situation, there's probably lots of reflection going on in different districts and schools and trying to say, how can we normalize technology in a way to
Mhm.
avoid these situations and provide some other learning opportunities while students come from different backgrounds, and you don't
Mhm.
want to have the haves and the have-nots in these cases because it's so very important. So I have a feeling we're going to
Yeah.
hear a lot about that in the coming months and years.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
Should we close the poll for now? We got a great indication here. So
yeah,
there is
this
a
is
good
great.
proportion. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
like 30 some percent have a one-to-one
Mhm.
project at this point, which is a pretty high
Yeah.
percentage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great information to have, and I'd just love for you to kind of keep in mind whether kids are using school technology or their own devices as we go through some of the challenges that kids are facing. When kids have their own device, they're able to receive notifications and messages, and they can download any apps that they'd like. Whereas if they have a school device, there are limitations in place, and it's a little bit easier for students to manage the technology in school and at home. So it's just something to keep in mind. One of the
I,
many challenges.
I'd
Mhm.
add something really important. If you're talking about self management and organizing yourself, if you don't have a device that's dedicated for that, that's available at all time, I suggest that schools that have dropped paper planners uh, actually look back into them. Because if
Mhm.
you can't afford the technology, at least paper gives students some kind of autonomy, and you can still focus on teaching them some of the skills.
Absolutely.
Advocating against technology for me is not is not a great thing.
It's not your
But
interest.
yeah, I mean, EF skills are so important, and that is a way that students used to
Mhm.
have, and we've seen that schools that pulled them out to replace these only with learning management systems were actually not encouraging the development of those skills so well.
Mhm. Yeah, for some students, a paper planner and whiteboard is truly best. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, so let's look at some of the challenges our students are facing. You can see here that we have, five major challenges kids are facing in this new era. And it's just kids don't go to school the way that we did. It's really important to remember that and just be empathetic as, kids are navigating these digital issues. So, what is being asked of our children today in terms of executive functioning is way more complex than it used to be, and their brains are not more ready. So, keep in mind that when we went to school, we would have a paper planner and we would write, whatever the teacher writes on the board. But now kids are being required to check multiple portals, and maybe there are 5 to 6 different teacher websites that all look different and have different settings. Teachers post at different times. So just keep in mind that kids are having to go through a lot more just to learn what they have to do. In addition to that, they're navigating, several different media for textbooks. I know some teachers and schools don't use textbooks at all, whereas others will use digital readers or some paper textbooks. And regarding digital books, just in general, when a student's reading, something that's longer than say 500 words, their attention and comprehension is lower than if they're reading on paper, and that's likely because you know we are used to multitasking when we're on screens, and so kids aren't just engaged in that paper text. So it's just something to keep in mind. And if you are a teacher that has your students on e-readers, encouraging them to use note-taking apps or digital annotation apps to employ active reading strategies is super helpful. So, in addition to the challenges of navigating portals, there is also the competing stimuli and technological distractions and social media. And because of immediate access to information and the impulse for instant gratification from online sources, students have a hard time saying how long it takes them to do their homework. They may be up in their room at their desk staring at a screen for 2 hours, but they might have a hard time telling you, I spent 20 minutes doing my English assignment and then 60 minutes watching YouTube. So it's really challenging for kids to identify, how long they're spending on work due to, multitasking. All right. And we don't, want to limit students. Gaming and social media, while they're huge time wasters, we don't want to completely restrict usage because we want kids to develop the self-management skills in order to do this on their own. But some kids need more scaffolding than others. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to quiet the noise in a few slides.
I just wanted to add that in today's conjunction, this is actually really important. My girlfriend is a teacher, and we can see the impact of trying to focus the kids at home when they're supposed to be learning still. But it's super hard. So the kids have to develop a little bit of autonomy over time, and we have to teach them how to do that. So it's a great opportunity for learning, actually. So it's not only negative aspects to this situation.
Definitely. And there are some great apps to help students self manage. Like there are free web blockers available, like Stay Focused. It's a Chrome extension. There's Self Control for Macs. And then Freedom is an app that students can use on their phone across devices. So there are some tools to help students as well for kids who really need that extra support. All right, so let's get to some of the good stuff. So let's talk about teaching executive functioning during the school day. So, teaching EF skills during the school day is essential, but I recognize that not every school is set up to easily execute this. An ideal setting for executive function skill building would be a homeroom, advisory, or a study hall, or even a separate study skills class if that's possible at your school. And if your school does not have these courses, a humanities or an English class would be the next best setting. There, the ideal time to teach these skills is middle school, when teachers really begin to shy away from strategies and focus just on content. Kids really need to learn these skills. And then for any students with learning differences or kids who are not picking up the executive function skills right away, perhaps they can have, a 15-minute weekly check-in with teachers. And then across content areas, no matter what you teach, teachers can support students by chunking assignments. So, for example, providing mini deadlines for long term projects rather than just providing one due date. And that way they can model how to backwards plan. Teachers can supervise students filling out paper planners or digital planners like Studio. And they can also use multimodal strategies when announcing any assignment changes in class. Just saying it aloud isn't the best fit for all students.
Right.
All right, so we have some specific tips. We're going to take a look at 5 different strategies that teachers can use in the classroom to support executive function. The first one is to explicitly teach students study skills, and that includes how to manage materials, time, and information. You can teach time management by encouraging the use of a planner, breaking down homework time, and estimating how long assignments will take. And this, the expectation isn't for the teacher to do all of this, but rather just encouraging your students to do it. This will help students prioritize tasks and manage their homework independently. You can teach materials management by modeling an organized workspace, encouraging students to remove unnecessary materials from their binders or backpack, and organizing your digital files on the online portal. This makes it easier for kids to find important papers, and it'll also provide you with more instructional time because kids won't be, shuffling through their desk or their backpack in order to find things. You can teach information management by supporting students in developing note-taking skills, active reading strategies, learning how to summarize chapters or things that they've read, and preparing for exams. As students enter, upper elementary and middle school, again, focus on strategies really declines and kids are just taught content. So a lot of students show up to high school and they don't know how to take notes or study. So it would be really great to see kids learn these strategies a little bit younger. And it's all good things for kids who know study skills. They have more agency and ownership of academics. And these strategies will also just increase their overall confidence as a learner and decrease that anxiety and overwhelm. All right. Study tip number 2, planning. All right, so teach students how to chunk assignments into manageable pieces and utilize backwards planning. Breaking tasks down into smaller chunks is beneficial to organization, increased motivation, and task initiation. Teachers can help students backwards plan and chunk assignments, again, by providing multiple due dates and as much lead time as possible before exams. This allows students to schedule study time across a few days. And you'll learn a little bit more about this later, but in the studio planner, students can actually, decide to plan 4 days in advance of a test or whatever it is, and they can schedule how they're going to study, which is really cool. Um, Keep in mind that your online portal is not a substitute for a calendar or a task list. So students really should be using some kind of planner, whether that's a paper planner or a digital calendar and a to-do list. Um, in order to know what's due in each class, when it's due, how it's going to get done, what materials are needed, and how long it's going to take, requires more than the LMS. The learning management system doesn't know when the student has a soccer tournament, right before a big exam, or the fact that grandma's visiting on Thursday and there's a paper due Friday. So it's really important that kids are able to add personal appointments and extracurriculars to their calendar.
Now, surprisingly, that's one of the preferred features we hear from students,
Mhm.
especially those that are in special programs like music or sports, where they
Mhm.
need to really learn to juggle their time.
Absolutely. All right. Third tip is focus. So here we're going to talk a little bit about quieting the noise. So we'd really recommend that students work for short periods and then take an active break. So I love the Pomodoro method for this reason. You work for 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break, recap, reflect on what you accomplished, and then repeat the process. I find that some students begin with no plan and then they get stuck. One of the things I love about Studio is that you're encouraged to plan, and kids have a clear picture of what they have to do each day. I think that's amazing. Students should identify ways to reduce distractions when they're working independently. Whether that's put your phone away, make sure your workspace is really clear, there's not clutter. Make sure to have plenty of snacks nearby. Whatever it's going to take to allow the student to sit and complete their work. There's an interesting study out of UC Irvine about the cost of interrupted work that I just find fascinating. But researchers found that it requires 23 minutes of to refocus every time we're interrupted. So whether we're checking our email or social media, or stopping to watch a quick YouTube video, we are losing time in order to refocus. And in order to compensate for that, we try to speed up or move faster, which then leads to stress and overwhelm. So multitasking feels productive in the moment, but it really shows that it's less productive and stress inducing. And we have to imagine how this happens, or how this impacts our children and our teenagers, um, their brains, which are still developing. It makes it even more challenging to kind of avoid distraction with willpower alone. All right, study tip number 4, self advocacy. So, this is a lifelong skill that will support students through adulthood and in their careers. Students must be able to collaborate with others and communicate effectively in order to experience academic and real world success. Group projects are a great way for students to exercise self advocacy. They have the opportunity to share their expectations and their needs with peers, and they must know when and how to ask for support. In order to seek support, students must understand their own strengths and stretches as learners. If they have a learning difference and they have any accommodations, they must know what's available to them, and they must be comfortable asking for support. Self-advocacy skills leads to higher self-esteem, autonomy, and leadership, all traits that we want for our children. All right, study tip number 5: self-monitoring. What are your workarounds when you get stuck? When students are stuck during independent work, they might think, oh, I can't focus, I don't know how to start, I don't want to do this, or what if it's not perfect? Students get stuck for a variety of reasons, including lack of attention or focus, misunderstanding of directions, anxiety about meeting expectations, or even a lack of interest. As educators, we must try to anticipate the needs of our students. What workarounds can we put in place to help them when they hit a roadblock? Some kids benefit from having a checklist to access that's individualized to them. I would say nearly every student would benefit from having a peer buddy in class that they can text or call if they have a question. And then knowing that their teacher is available, certain hours during the day, or via email, from 3 to 4 p.m. or whatever it is really helpful. During class, it's also important that students use self-monitoring skills. If they stop paying attention, what cues can you use to help them realize that and re-engage? While working independently, they can also use self-monitoring by employing strategies for writing or for math, like checking your work or using, acronyms like COPS for self-editing. All right, we've got another poll.
Okay.
Excited to hear from you guys. Um,
Yeah, when they're talking.
I know I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh,
So
it's
what's
great. It's
one
great
aspect
info. Uh,
what's one
I can see
aspect of
that.
executive functioning that you would like to focus on in your school? Obviously, there's so much, but if you could narrow it down to just one topic,
Mm,
which one would you choose? You go
well,
ahead.
looking at the chat room, there's lots of information already out there. So many different aspects. So many people have different strategies.
Mhm.
Um, oh,
Wow,
hey,
self advocacy.
advocacy
Self
is really
advocacy
important.
for
And
the win.
so important, but it's being caught up by, goal-directed behavior is kind of interesting. Lots of organization there as a
Mhm.
general thing. Planning, trailing behind. Remember, planning also affects metacognitive skills, which has been shown to really have a strong, long-lasting effect
Mhm.
in academic and other success. But yeah, organization in general, if you're not organized, there's nothing else you can do. But self advocacy really important. Well, if you look at social emotional learning is really important too. This plays into
Mhm.
that as well,
Oh,
right?
definitely, definitely. Yeah, and I see some others in the chat. I see, study skills, self control, all good things. Chunking, self monitoring. Great. So it looks like self advocacy has a narrow lead on organization and then goal directed behavior. I'll give you
Yeah,
guys just a few more seconds to respond.
yeah, almost equal. They're pretty much nose to
Yeah,
nose.
this is so interesting. Thank you so much
Interesting.
for
Thank you.
participating in the poll.
Right. Thanks a lot.
And with that, we are going to let's see if we can end the poll. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. All right. Now we're going to dive into more of an administrative component. So we're going to look at fostering a culture of executive function at the school level. So not
Looking
just
at
the classroom level, but globally.
just looking at the time, it is 5:41. So we're just
Okay.
tracking ourselves here.
I should be done in like 7 or 8 minutes.
That's fine.
Um, So, the first thing you need to do is analyze current systems and anticipate what problems will arise for students in terms of executive functioning. So, I would encourage you to evaluate your school portal from an executive functioning lens. How many websites are students accessing in order to find assignments? Like, do they have a separate portal for grades, Google Classroom, and then a separate learning management system? Does each class look the same? Does your portal pull the homework to one central location for students? Are teachers required to use the portal, and are they consistent? Can students enter their own task like an extracurricular activity? In my experience, the answer is no, but that's one thing that's missing from LMS. And then for those students with low executive functioning, what are some challenges that they're going to run into? So, when we're considering interventions to promote executive functioning, we can intervene at the environmental level or at the level of the student. So, let's look at a few other ways to foster a culture of EF. So I think teacher training and professional
Mm.
development is so important.
Yeah.
Executive functioning is a really great area, and I feel that it's an area not covered enough in education programs and even in specialized advanced degrees. It's certainly something I did not learn about in my master's program. Um, and I think along with that, teachers need to take a look at their own executive functioning and look at their own strengths and stretches when it comes to planning and organization. There are some teachers who are so passionate and engaging in the classroom, but they may, themselves struggle with executive functioning a bit and may not be as organized on the portal or, consistent about posting assignments. So it's just important to take a look at that and provide support if needed. Um, Professional development for staff, it should be a minimum of a half day. I think it should include case studies about executive functioning, and then learning outcomes would really be calendaring, task management, self advocacy, which you guys are so interested in, and then organization and planning. Teachers and staff really need to be able to talk about executive functioning with kids. All right, from there, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but teaching executive functioning skills during the school day is so essential. And most schools aren't able to do this. I know Reno has some great success stories that he can share in a moment, but students must be explicitly taught these skills
Yeah.
through scaffolding and modeling, and then kids develop them through practice. So, like everything that we teach, there's modeling, guided practice, feedback. That's so important for kids.
Very true. Now, one school that works with us has actually transformed their schedule to push back one class that was happening in grade 7 all the way to grade 8, to bring in a new study skills and organization class to focus on teaching executive functioning skills on grade 7.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, and we need to see more of that. And then another thing that we need is more modeling of planning and study skills, so children can then generalize, take agency and ownership of these skills themselves. All right. Um, an easy one that most people do is implementing and managing classroom routines, roles, and organizational systems. Because the developmental progression of executive function is from external to internal, we really need teachers to provide the support and scaffolding to students. In early childhood, parents really act as the frontal lobe for their children by setting guidelines and limits. And in the same way, teachers do that for their students. Um, and then the final idea is to create a school wide accountability system. If it's realistic for your school, ideally each student would have a point person, whether that's an advisor or a learning specialist or a counselor, that they see for executive functioning support on a weekly basis. Just a quick check in. How are things going? Take a look at grades, missing and lates, and really just be there for the student when they need some support. If that's not possible, another idea is to have a peer buddy system for students. So when you have a child that's really thriving with executive functioning, type A student who loves this, matching them with a younger peer that's maybe not doing so well and could use some extra support. There's a great study by Kathleen Harris, which was done in 2016, that shares that supporting children in their efforts to develop stronger executive functioning skills really builds resilience and helps these students discover and facilitate school interaction, problem solving skills, and confidence in their cognitive decision making. So this helps students, be successful in and out of the classroom, which is what we want for every child. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Renaud, and he's going to tell you more about the Digital Planner Studio.
Thank you so much, Courtney. So, lots of information here. So, don't forget, everybody, you'll have access to a recording of the session as well as the notes and the transcript of the chat. So, obviously, and if you have questions, you can reach out to our different entities. You'll have our contact information at the end, of course. So, let's take a look here at who we are at Studio. And Studio was built basically from the demands of schools up in Canada that were looking for ways to engage their students. And one of the major reasons why they were looking at this was, and maybe I'll cut my video here to increase the size of the slides here. One of the first things that they were asking us is for students to be more engaged in their own organization and planning, so that teachers weren't just spoon feeding them the the homework they had to do and exactly how they had to do it. So we built this set of tools to really promote that. So it was built for one-to-one schools, and it is focused mostly on middle school and high school, although we do have students from fourth grade and up using it. Um, the principles behind the planner are quite simple. Clarity is the first one. So we talked about how it's important that information be clear and visible to students, and existing systems weren't cutting it for that. So the way Studio is built is it displays your whole schedule exactly how it is with the proper bell times and labels for periods or blocks. All the classes are already laid out. If you're on a rotating schedule, that all follows. And the tasks themselves that students have to uh, work on are displayed as icons. So we use colors and icons to represent everything. So this offers a second visual layer of language that we can use. So an icon can have a state, it's done or it's not done or it's late. And then the color has different significations depending on the situation. And what's also interesting is that the tasks are directly linked to the class, and you can see them all in context of the schedule. So very important there. We'll see it live in a few seconds after I'm done with this. So the goal here is to quiet the noise that's there as well. If you've ever seen a middle school's students' schedule in a calendar, you'll probably have noticed too. There's a lot of things happening, but it's mostly text boxes. So here we're trying to make that clear. The second thing is agency. Now, all of the systems out there are pretty much are teacher focused. Teachers have to put in everything themselves, which is a lot of work. But that means homework and personal tasks can't appear there if they're not entered by teachers. So now this was important to allow students to enter their own information, but not just that, also to act upon teacher provided tasks. So if they're published to the Studio, students can mark them as done or plan the work over time. So that was really important. And as Courtney mentioned, if you have something going on from during, on Thursday night, your grandma's coming for dinner and you have something, a paper to hand in on Friday, it's important to see those things in the same place. Otherwise, we're expecting students to kind of shift their focus and build everything in their working memory, which typically doesn't work. Um, the other important principle is self-management. Students get the chance to take decisions with Studio and try things out. We were talking about the right environment, a safe environment to try things and see what the result is. So every task in Studio is built with an announcement date and a due date and is displayed on this timeline. And students have control over what's called the planning icon, which is basically the next step they have decided to work on a task. And this is true of tasks that are coming in from different systems or published by teachers, as well as the ones that students enter. And the idea is to build habits, because that's the the uh, the basic block that students have to work with. By building habits every day, they can then achieve goals, and then goals become motivators, and then motivators bring on more goals. Following that, we didn't want to burden teachers with extra work. So the way we built that in is through connectors that can pull tasks such as homework and exams that have already been entered in other systems. So probably, most of the learning management systems that are used out there are covered. And this avoids extra work for teachers, of course. All of this to help support executive functioning skills and allow students to initiate their tasks and plan their work and even break down tasks into smaller chunks so that they become more manageable and they can organize their thought process in their minds. All this also because it helps with their working memory if everything is in one place and they don't have to keep everything in their mind as to, oh, I have to check on the LMS, on Google Classroom, on my paper planner, or whatever the teacher has told us in class and written on the board, because, well, we still do that. Now, Studio has had quite a bit of success. Once implemented in a school, such as this example school here, uh, almost 90% of students use it every day. The rest of them use it every maybe second day, which is also pretty good. So you can see this engagement graph here throughout the year, where weekends have a little dip, obviously, and then Christmas break or March break, they drop out. We'll see a live school in a minute. I'll show you what that looks like. Finally, we can now also assess executive functioning skills in different ways by going and observing how students are getting organized. So because we have a tool that's being used all day throughout the day by pretty much all the students in the school, teachers and administrators can go in and take a look at how each student is getting organized. But I think the best way to show this to you is actually to show it to you very quickly. So I'll do a really quick demo of what the studio planner looks like. I'll just share my planner here. Fantastic. So this is the studio planner. The first thing you'll notice is that it shows a real schedule of a school with numbered periods and the exact classes occurring at the different times that they are supposed to occur. And for students can, of course, navigate this through different interfaces depending on the device, but it might be by clicking arrows or just scrolling here from day to day. Now, of course, teachers can publish to Studio through the different systems, but let's look at the scenario of a student entering their own task. We want to make that really easy. So perhaps right now we are in our science class here at the top, and I'll just tap in that white area next to the science area. So you can probably see my arrow here. So this white area right here, I'll just tap or click to bring up the new task icon. And what I'll do here is pick a type of icon. So let's say I have a lab in science. We have a whole series of icons here that are available. And I'll go in and put in some specific information. I think we did a shampoo lab this week, and I need to work on my report. And maybe I'll add some notes. Follow instructions on page 3 of the textbook. And the next step is to pick the due date, because typically students will enter things on the current day because they're in that class right now. You'll notice 3 icons there for different dates that are related to this task. So I'll tap the due icon, and I can pick the time this is due. So maybe this is due next week on Thursday. Notice how, if you're using a rotating schedule, you can see the days where this class actually occurs. So I'll pick the 26th. And for now, that's all we'll look into. I won't go into all the details. But you'll notice that there's an icon. It's pretty pale, but it's being displayed right now, which is my current the date of announcement. So this task was announced to me today. But what's important is that when I look at the whole week ahead and the following weeks, you'll notice that it's really easy to locate those tasks because they're in the context of each of the classes of the student. And it makes sense in their mind because that's how they visualize their week and their day. And I can see the shampoo lab is right there. But where we want to bring students is in the task view. The task view displays all of the tasks across time on this timeline. You'll notice this new shampoo lab at the bottom here, shampoo lab report, but all the other tasks that I have to do. So this is not very visible typically if you're looking at your current day. You can't see the other tasks that you're supposed to be working on. So what's interesting here is that you can see those tasks appear from the announcement date all the way till the due date. And you'll notice this other icon right here that is the planning icon. And this is an icon that students have control over. So for example, my favorite Shakespeare sonnet, I can read a little bit of it and then double tap or double click on the planned icon, and it moves over my date of work or my next date for working on this to tomorrow. You'll notice on the right, it's now gone from the today list, which is my list of things I've given myself to work on today. So I can go through this list, look at my oral on the Middle East here in my geography class, and maybe I'll practice that a little bit and shift it and say, no, I'll continue this weekend, so I can just move it off a couple of days. And I can do that with all of my tasks. But notice this last task, my term exam in math. This is quite a long-term task. It was announced a few weeks ago, so I've been working on this constantly, and it's due, on the 30th. Notice the dots there correspond to the steps or the chunks on the right. And these are things that students can add for themselves, even if the task is coming in from another system. And they can go in and mark the different things they have to do and put a specific date there as like a milestone of what they want to achieve. Once they're done, they can mark individual items as done and then set their next working session. And now they're done. So, there's this sense of happiness as you realize that you're done with your work. So that's the idea of studio, building the habit of going in and managing each one of the tasks that you have, checking if you have any new ones as you build this skill set. Now, the next thing you want to do is look at the back end. And here's an example of a school that has exactly that. So this school has been using Studio for 2 years, and they are now, really into it. You can see that students are really connecting on a daily basis, almost all of them. Christmas break was a little bit of a dip there, of course, and then March break and spring break, March break, and all that. Notice how over the last week, though, they're still at almost 1,500 students connecting daily, and the school has been closed for a week now. So this means this school actually moved on to online learning fairly easily in this time of crisis. So that's something else that you can look into. Now, teachers have access to these tools. And if I look at a teacher's screen, for example, you can tell there's a whole different series of tools they can use to look at how things are happening in the school. The first tool is the workload manager, which shows you days on which some students have more than a certain number of exams. That's hard to coordinate in some schools. So if you want to make sure you've picked the right dates to put your own exams and you're in a middle school or high school, this is a great way to see that. So I can check here, there are 29 kids that are overwhelmed by their exams, and I can go and take a look at all the different tasks that are there. Now, this is a bilingual school. They have both French and English, so that might be, that's why you're seeing things in French. But you can see which other teacher has published to this group on this date, and you can go and contact them and say, well, would you mind moving something, or I really need to use this date for my exam, but then these kids would have 4, whatever conversation makes sense. Now, you can also see how students are getting organized. And besides seeing all the tasks that are published in the school, I can see here that I've published a few tasks to some of my students. These gray dots here indicate I've published something. So this geography group of 30 students on Wednesday had 2 tasks. I'll take a look at the state of these tasks. I can see all of my students have the task entered. Quite a few of them are done with the task and have marked it as done. That's pretty good. Some of them have actually planned the task, meaning they changed the planning date of the task to move it forward. And well, this task didn't warrant any steps. Now, this is a live school, so it's really real information. The names are obfuscated, though, to protect the innocent. Now, for each of these students, you can actually go and look at all the students in your school and see how they're getting organized. So I can see which students are opening the app, which are completing tasks over time. So I can take a student that's doing, not such a good job, like let's try this student here that seems to be opening the planner quite a bit, but not completing tasks. We can go in and look at this. Wow, interesting. So, the student was a little bit struggling with getting into their planner every day here, throughout the first days of the year in October and, November. It was not so thorough. But lately, starting February, look at that. This started going into the planner all the time, which is great. So you can see that this improved. Now, unfortunately, the same is not true of completing their tasks. So if I look at the actual graph of this, you can see Wow, this student has late tasks all that just keep growing and growing and growing. So either they're not going in and marking them as done, or they haven't learned how to do that. So it depends on the student and where they're at. So let's take another one that's pretty good at it. This student here is really thorough. You can see they're going into their planner all the time, and they weren't so thorough with marking everything as done constantly, but still pretty good. And lately, it's improved. So that's a good trend. So we're going to keep tracking this student, see if everything is going well. Now, if you have students that have lots of issues, here's a student that's not doing anything. What's going on there? Yeah, used to be pretty good, and then all of a sudden it's red. Now things were fairly problematic here, but not so bad. And then bang, red again. Maybe something's happening here. Maybe this is an indicator of something. So as you can see, you can have some visual, you know, understanding of what's going on there, and it's definitely something that you can track. So let me switch back to turn this on and share my presentation right here. So we're back in the presentation right there. There we are. So,
We're
wow,
back.
that was a lot of info. So yeah,
Great job
we're
right now.
trying to do a lot of demo there. So of course, this is just part of what we do at Studio. But if you are interested in knowing more, of course, you can follow up with us and you'll get an email from us after this presentation. So we're really excited about how our schools are using this right now in these difficult times, tracking and trying to keep students on track. And you can actually go and see their planner directly and all that. So it's really good. So that being said, let's see if we have any specific questions coming up that haven't been answered throughout the information. I'm sure there are a few out there, although the team was there to respond. Oh, we have some information right here. Okay, all good. Perfect. Well, if you do have questions, you can enter them in there. Um, we will reach out to you, of course, and you'll have some information on both Hayton and Studio following this session. If there are no specific questions right now, that's fine. I mean, lots of information here today, right? Is this linked to Google Calendar? Hey, there's a question. Thanks. Yes, it is in many ways, actually. So, what we can do with Google Calendar is turn a calendar uh, into a series of tasks and have those show up in the planner. You can also share your planner with Google Calendar so that you can share it with somebody that just wants to see it on the regular calendar. There's a few ways to do that. So, depending on the specific scenario, that's something you want to do. Here's a question on, does it work on Android? Whoops. Questions are kind of going forward. So the question on Android and tablets and cells, yes, definitely. It works on all those. No problem at all. We have versions for all of that already. iPhone, Android, tablets, the web, Chromebooks are all supported. In a non-school version, yeah, actually, yes. Not only is there a non-school version, you can create your own little private planner. You can go to studio.co and just connect and create your account. But we're also making this free to all parents coming soon as an individual account so that they can help their child get more structured at home during this time of viruses and crisis. So that's going to be free for the foreseeable future. Currently, iOS is still requires a subscription, but we're going to be working on that shortly to make that $0. So that's going to be working. And can a student use it by themselves without the school using it? Yes, it's possible. The individual version will allow you to do that. They do have to have the ability and the right to use a device in class to be able to do that, because without a device being available at all times, it's hard to self-manage and take down notes and all that. Challenges in implementing this within a school with not so predictive ideology. Okay, I'm not too sure I understand the whole question here, but what are the challenges? Well, the biggest challenge, and I think Courtney, you mentioned this a lot, is it's really important to put in place this um, structure in school and teach teachers about executive functioning, and maybe having at least a layer of teachers reminding students about things. And then it's to set up the right times to actually teach students properly, not just how to use the tool, but how to get organized. And that's not something you do like in a 20-minute session. It's something that you have to do in small pieces over time. So if your school
Exactly.
really wants to do this, right? Is that what you think as well, Courtney?
Yeah, exactly. That's why we recommended doing, whether it's a study skills class or having some kind of weekly executive functioning curriculum for an advisory or homeroom, but it's something that needs to be explicitly taught over time.
Great. See if there are more questions. Courtney, who's doing the
Oh,
more research?
Marion. So I responded to Marion in the chat, but Peg Dawson, Richard Guare, and Lynn Meltzer are really the executive function gurus. There are several books available by each of those authors, and there are also lots of materials available online.
Fantastic. How many minutes it takes to refocus, huh?
Oh, that's so funny. It's 23 minutes,
Wow.
and just keep in mind that we try to work faster to compensate for that lost time.
Wow. 23. That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Mhm. Yes.
The cost of studio, well, it varies. We have different layers. There's the planner, there's an insights platform, there's different modules in there. And, we try to be in line with the price of paper planners. So depending on what you do there for the studio planner part, if you reach out to our team, we'll figure out a model that works for your school, depending on the number of students that you have, so that it makes sense based on your budgets. So, we're really trying to make headways there. So we're quite flexible and figure out the right model and the right set of solutions in there that fit. And I think that's it.
We did it.
We did it all. We had the question. We're gonna send off a resource to show how to build executive, how to assess executive functioning skills. We'll work on a little white paper thing for
Yes,
everybody.
that sounds great.
Great. So thank you. Courtney, I wanted to thank you personally. I mean, I think the feedback was amazing in the chat room on your part of the presentation. Thank you so much for sharing your experience
Yeah,
with us. It's
absolutely.
been
Thank you for having me.
tremendous.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Looking
thank you
forward.
to Studio. It definitely provides a solution for a lot of students and schools, and that learning management system just isn't enough. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah.
All right.
All right.
So
Thanks
looking
everyone for
forward.
joining. This was really
Thank
fun.
you. Thanks. Thanks
All
everyone.
right. Take care.
Bye bye.